Zuri's cheek still bunged with a searing heat from her father's slap, but it was his words, sharp and venomous, that had sliced into her soul. "You're no daughter of mine," he had hissed, his voice trembling not with sadness, but with pure, unadulterated disgust. The lavish party at the Adewale family estate came to a dead stop. Hundreds of glittering guests froze, their champagne glasses suspended in midair, their hushed whispers dying into a suffocating silence. No one dared to breathe, no one dared to move. The man who had raised her, the titan of industry who had once called her his precious firstborn, had just publicly executed her reputation in front of everyone they knew. But the nightmare was only beginning. The very next morning, a chilling call came from the family's lawyers. They informed her, in cold, sterile tones, that her name wasn't Zuri Adewale. They claimed she was never supposed to be a part of the Adewale family at all. And what they revealed next was a secret so dark and deep, it would unravel everything she ever believed about love, loyalty, and the very blood that flowed through her veins. The night was supposed to have been a masterpiece of love and celebration. Soft golden lights shimmered from crystal chandeliers, a string quartet played a gentle melody in the corner, and guests draped in designer clothes and sparkling jewels filled the cavernous halls of the Adewale mansion. Zuri had poured her entire heart into planning every single detail. She had handpicked the golden decorations to match her father's favorite tie. She had argued with the baker for hours to perfect the flavor of his birthday cake, and she had spent countless nights curating a slideshow of his cherished childhood memories. All she wanted, all she had ever wanted, was to see him smile, to hear him finally say the words, "I'm proud of you, Zuri." For weeks she had run on fumes, barely sleeping, obsessing over every minor detail to ensure the celebration of his 60th birthday was absolutely flawless. When her father, the formidable Mr. Adewale, finally stood to give his speech, Zuri's heart swelled with a painful, desperate hope. He raised his crystal glass, the light catching in the expensive liquid, and began to speak. He thanked everyone, his voice booming with confidence. He lavished praise upon his beautiful wife, Nola, his powerful business partners, and his 2 handsome sons. He mentioned everyone but her. Zuri waited, her hands clenched into fists in the folds of her dress, her breath caught in her throat. She told herself he was saving her for last, for a special mention. But the speech ended, and he never said her name. His eyes, cold and distant, skipped right over her, as if she were a ghost, a piece of furniture, completely invisible. A tight, cold knot formed in her chest, and a wave of confusion washed over her. When the thunderous applause finally faded, she moved through the crowd, her steps quiet and uncertain. She approached him, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Dad," she asked, her voice barely a whisper, "did I do something wrong?" The entire room seemed to hold its breath. Her father turned to face her, his celebratory smile vanishing like a snuffed-out candle. A mask of pure ice replaced it. "You know exactly what you did," he said, his voice dangerously low. Zuri blinked, the shock of his tone hitting her like a physical blow. "I don't understand," she stammered, her mind racing, trying to figure out what she could have possibly done to deserve such coldness. He cut her off sharply, his words like shards of glass. "Don't play the innocent little girl with me. You stole from the family trust." A collective gasp echoed through the grand ballroom. Zuri's heart didn't just stop, it shattered. "What? No, I would never," she tried to explain, her voice trembling uncontrollably, but she never got to finish the sentence. His hand shot out and connected with her cheek. The sound was a sharp, ugly crack that reverberated in the sudden dead silence. The pain was immediate, a burning, stinging agony, but what hurt infinitely more was the raw hatred she saw blazing in his eyes. Every single guest was frozen in place, a tableau of shock and horror. No one moved, no one spoke, no one came to her defense. Zuri stood there paralyzed, her vision blurring with hot, unshed tears as she tentatively touched her throbbing cheek. Her father turned his back on her, his entire body shaking with a rage that seemed to come from a place she had never seen before. "You're no daughter of mine," he repeated, each word a final, devastating blow. Her world, so carefully constructed, collapsed into dust right there in front of everyone she had ever known. She desperately scanned the room, her eyes pleading for someone, anyone to help her, to say it wasn't true. But all she found were eyes that quickly looked away, faces filled with pity or scorn, and the cruel sound of whispers starting to ripple through the crowd. Her stepmother, Nola, stood in a far corner, a faint, triumphant smirk playing on her perfectly painted lips. She looked as though she had been waiting for this exact moment her entire life. Zuri felt her knees begin to buckle, a crushing weight settling on her chest, making it impossible to breathe. All her life she had done everything to earn her father's love, to make him proud, to prove that she, her firstborn, belonged. And in one single brutal moment, he had discarded her as if she were nothing more than trash. As she stumbled out of the mansion, the party music, insultingly cheerful, started up again. But for Zuri, everything was already over. The next morning, Zuri woke up with a gasp, her heart pounding with the desperate hope that it had all been a terrible, vivid nightmare. But the moment she stepped out of her bedroom, that hope died. The hallway was cluttered with cardboard boxes, stacked high and sealed with tape. Her clothes, her shoes, her photographs, her entire life was packed away. Standing by the grand staircase was her stepmother, Nola, dressed in an immaculate silk robe, holding a delicate cup of tea. She looked serene, almost pleased. "It's better this way, dear," Nola said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "Your father has made his decision. It's final." A few moments later, the family lawyer Mr. Kudo arrived, his face grim as he clutched a thick brown envelope. He couldn't meet Zuri's eyes as he stiffly handed it to her. Her fingers trembled as she tore it open. Inside was a legal document, its cold, formal language stating that she had been officially disinherited and removed from the Adewale family trust. All $31 million of it. Her name, her very existence, had been legally erased. "Mr. Adewale doesn't wish to see you," the lawyer said softly, his voice full of a discomfort he couldn't hide. "He has asked that you leave the premises immediately." Zuri's hands shook so violently the papers rattled. "Not even to say goodbye?" she asked, her voice cracking under the weight of her grief. The lawyer said nothing, simply staring at a spot on the marble floor. Nola turned away, examining her fingernails with disinterest, as the household guards began to carry Zuri's boxes out to the driveway. Zuri wanted to scream, to rage, to demand the truth, but no words would come out. Her throat was tight with unspeakable pain. She walked numbly down the long sunlit hallway, past the gallery of perfectly framed family portraits. There was her father, smiling with pride. There was Nola, looking regal beside him. There were her siblings, all looking happy and perfect. Her own portrait was there too, smiling out from the wall. She wondered how long it would be before they took it down. Outside, the family driver stood by the car, his kind eyes filled with a deep, sorrowful pity. "Miss Zuri, where shall I take you?" he asked quietly. She didn't know. The mansion behind her, which had been her home for her entire life, now felt like a cold, hostile stranger's house. She had nowhere to go, not a single dollar in her name, and no explanation for why the people she loved most in the world had so viciously turned against her overnight. As the driver loaded her last box, she opened it and found the one thing she couldn't bear to leave behind, her late mother's old journal. It was the only piece of true, unconditional love she had left. She clutched it to her chest as if it were a lifeline, her tears finally falling, staining the worn leather cover. She didn't know it yet, but inside those faded pages lay a hidden truth, a secret so dark and deep, it would unravel everything she ever believed about love, loyalty, and the very blood that flowed through her veins. The night was supposed to have been a masterpiece of love and celebration.
Soft golden lights shimmered from crystal chandeliers, a string quartet played a gentle melody in the corner, and guests draped in designer clothes and sparkling jewels filled the cavernous halls of the Ottawali mansion. Zuri had poured her entire heart into planning every single detail. She had hand-picked the golden decorations to match her father's favorite tie. She had argued with the baker for hours to perfect the flavor of his birthday cake, and she had spent countless nights curating a slideshow of his cherished childhood memories. All she wanted, all she had ever wanted, was to see him smile, to hear him finally say the words, "I'm proud of you, Zuri." For weeks, she had run on fumes, barely sleeping, obsessing over every minor detail to ensure the celebration of his 60th birthday was absolutely flawless. When her father, the formidable Mr. Ottawale, finally stood to give his speech, Zuri's heart swelled with a painful
One evening, as rain pattered against the window pane, she sat holding her late mother's journal. The leather was soft and worn from years of use, the cover cracked at the edges. She opened it gently, hoping to feel close to her mother again, to find some semblance of peace in her familiar, elegant handwriting. The pages were filled with her mother's thoughts, notes about her favorite flowers, tender memories of Zuri's first steps, and heartfelt prayers for her daughter to grow into a kind, resilient, and strong woman. Zuri smiled through her tears as she read the loving words. But then, something caught her eye. Near the back of the journal, one page felt thicker, stiffer than the rest. It was 2 pages stuck together. Gently, she worked her fingernail into the seam and pulled them apart. Tucked neatly between them was a single folded piece of paper. Her heart began to beat a frantic, uneven rhythm. The letter was old, the paper yellowed at the edges, and the ink had faded to a pale blue. At the top, it was addressed, "To the Ottawani family," and it was signed by someone named Sada. The date at the bottom shocked her. It was written just a few months before she was born. Zuri frowned, whispering the unfamiliar name under her breath. Sada. She had never heard of anyone named Sada connected to her family. Her curiosity piqued, she began to read. The words felt strange, heavy with a meaning she couldn't yet grasp, like a dark secret she was never supposed to uncover. The letter spoke of a baby girl, of a mysterious exchange, and of a sacred promise that had been broken. Then came the line that made her hands begin to shake uncontrollably. "If you continue to hide the truth, it will destroy you all." Zuri's mind spun in a dizzying vortex of questions. What exchange? What truth? Who was this woman named Sada, and what in the world did she have to do with her family? She read the letter again and again, desperately searching for answers, but it only raised more terrifying questions. Toby found her hours later, sitting frozen on the bed, the letter trembling in her hands, her face as white as a sheet. "Zuri, what is it? What's wrong?" she asked, her voice laced with concern. This letter," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "I think my whole life is a lie." That night, Zuri didn't sleep at all. The words from the letter echoed in her mind, a haunting premonition. If you hide the truth, it will destroy you all. She didn't know what it all meant yet, but deep down, in a place beyond logic and reason, she felt a chilling certainty. Her story was only just beginning. Zuri couldn't get the letter out of her head. Every cryptic word was burned into her memory, playing on a constant loop. The name Sada, the ominous warning, the chilling mention of a baby exchange, it all felt inextricably connected to her, to the sudden, violent rejection by the man she called her father. She tried to rationalize it, to convince herself it was just some old, forgotten family misunderstanding. But a cold, hard knot of certainty in her gut told her the truth was much bigger, much darker. She needed undeniable proof, an answer that no one could twist or deny.
One evening, while numbly unpacking the few possessions she had brought from the mansion, her eyes fell on an old, silver-backed hairbrush she had swiped from her father's study years ago as a silly keepsake. It was still tucked away in her bag. She remembered watching him use it every morning, the familiar rhythmic strokes through his thick, grayin hair. She had once thought it was a sweet sentimental thing to keep, but now that simple, forgotten object could hold the key to unlocking her entire life. Her hands shook as she carefully plucked a single strand of dark hair that was still tangled in the bristles. With a deep, shuddering breath, she placed it in a small plastic bag. The next day, she spent hours online researching private DNA testing services. She didn't tell Toby. She didn't tell anyone. The secret was too fragile, too potentially devastating to even speak out loud. She mailed her own saliva sample along with the single strand of hair, and then began the agonizing wait. Each day that followed felt like an eternity. She couldn't eat. She couldn't focus. Her life was suspended in a state of limbo. Every time her phone buzzed with a notification, her heart leapt into her throat. When the results finally arrived in an email, she stared at the unopened message for a long time, her finger hovering over the screen. Her entire identity, everything she was, hinged on what was inside. Taking a deep, ragged breath, she finally clicked the email open. The words on the screen blurred for a moment before snapping into sharp, brutal focus. She only needed to read one line, a clinical, soul-crushing sentence that changed everything forever. Probability of paternity, 0%. No biological relation detected. Her heart didn't just drop. It plummeted into a black, bottomless abyss. 0%. Not a single trace of a connection. The man she had loved, idolized, and desperately tried to please her entire life wasn't her father. Zuri stared at the screen, silent tears streaming down her face, dripping onto the keyboard. She whispered the question to the empty room, her voice a broken rasp. Then, who am I? The thought hit her with the force of a tidal wave. Everything, her name, her family, her memories, her childhood, suddenly felt like an elaborate fiction, a story someone else had written for her. Her mother's journal, the hidden letter from Sada, her father's sudden, inexplicable rage, it all clicked into place with terrible, horrifying clarity. She frantically tried to remember moments from her childhood, searching for signs she had missed. The strange, calculating way Nola sometimes looked at her, the way her father would sometimes avoid his gaze, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. Had they all known? Had she been the only one living in the dark? Zuri felt her world collapse all over again, but this time it wasn't just pain and grief she felt. It was a cold, hard anger beginning to bloom in her chest. The people she had trusted most had built her entire life on a foundation of lies. She closed her laptop with a decisive snap and whispered through her tears, her voice hardening with resolution. If they lied about who I am, then I will find the truth myself. Zuri couldn't stop thinking about the DNA results. The words, "no relation detected," echoing in her mind, a constant, painful reminder that her whole existence was a carefully constructed lie. But the anger growing inside her was a powerful fuel. She still needed answers. She needed to know why her father had so cruelly accused her of stealing, and what had really been happening behind her back all those years. So one morning, she gathered every ounce of courage she possessed and went to the Adewale family's law firm. The sleek, towering glass building stood proudly in the heart of Abuja, a symbol of the power and influence she had once been part of. She had visited this place many times before, holding her father's hand, but this time she walked in as a complete outsider. When she entered the lavish marble-floored lobby, the receptionist looked up, her eyes widening in surprise, but she didn't say anything. "I need to see Mr. Kudo," she said, her voice quiet but firm. Moments later, the elderly lawyer appeared. The professional mask he usually wore slipped the moment he saw her. His expression wasn't of anger, but something that looked unnervingly like guilt. "Miss Zuri, didn't expect to see you," he said, his voice trembling almost imperceptibly. "I just want the truth," she said, softly, her gaze unwavering. "Why did he say I stole from him? What did I ever do wrong?" Mr. Kudo glanced around the busy lobby nervously and then quickly ushered her into his private office, closing the heavy oak door behind them. He walked over to a large, imposing filing cabinet, unlocked it with a small key from his pocket, and retrieved a thick sealed envelope from a folder labeled "Private, for Zuri, only upon Patriarch's death." He hesitated for a long moment before handing it to her. "This was never supposed to be opened yet," he murmured, his eyes full of conflict. "But your father recently made some changes to his will. It seems the new system protocols triggered this release early, by mistake." Zuri frowned, her heart beginning to pound. "What's inside?" she asked, her voice shaking.
He sighed, a deep, weary sound. "Something your mother left behind for you. Something that could change everything you know about yourself." Zuri's hands trembled as she broke the wax seal and unfolded the papers within. The first page was a letter, written in her mother's familiar handwriting, but the words were heavy and terrifyingly unfamiliar. It spoke of the child we could not have, and a mysterious debt owed to Sada. Then came the line that made the blood freeze in her veins. "If anyone ever finds out about the baby exchange, it will destroy us." Zuri looked up from the page, her eyes wide with horror, her voice barely a whisper. "Baby exchange? What does this mean?" Mr. Kudo's face had turned deathly pale. I shouldn't be saying this," he stammered quietly, "but your birth, it wasn't ordinary. There were secrets, Miss Zuri. Secrets your father buried a very long time ago. Secrets that were never, ever meant to come out." Zuri's heart hammered against her ribs as she numbly folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. She walked out of the office in a silent daze, the weight of this new, monstrous truth pressing down on her, threatening to suffocate her. She now knew her story was infinitely darker and more twisted than she had ever imagined, and she was only just beginning to uncover the depths of the betrayal. Zuri sat alone in Tabi's small room, staring at the letter she had taken from the lawyer's office. Her hands shook as she unfolded it again, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She had to know everything. The handwriting was neat, but faded with time. As she read, each line pulled her deeper and deeper into a truth so horrific she had never could have conceived of it. The letter began with the words, "My name is Sada, and if you are reading this, the truth has finally found its way to you." Zuri frowned, whispering the name softly. Sada. It was the same name from the hidden letter in her mother's journal. A cold dread washed over her as she read on. Sada wrote that she had once worked as a young, hopeful maid in the Adawali mansion many years ago. She described her life with a simple, poignant honesty, how she was poor but proud, and how she gave birth to a healthy baby girl who was cruelly taken from her just hours after the delivery. They had told her the baby had died, a tragic stillbirth, but she wrote that she never for 1 second believed it. She vividly remembered hearing the clear, strong cry of a newborn echoing from another room in the mansion that very same night. When she began asking desperate questions, she was abruptly fired and thrown out, warned to never return. Zuri's eyes filled with tears as she kept reading, her breath catching in her throat. The next part of the letter made her hand fly to her mouth to stifle a sob of pure shock. The letter revealed that the Adawali's own baby, born on the exact same night, had been stillborn. To protect their powerful reputation and avoid the public scandal of not producing an heir, they had made a monstrous decision. They had secretly replaced their lifeless child with Sada's baby, the one who had survived. That baby was Zuri. The adoption papers were forgeries.
the entire truth had been buried under a mountain of money and influence. The woman Zuri had called mother her entire life had been part of the deception. It wasn't an act of love. It was an act of cold, calculated desperation. And when Sada began searching tirelessly for her stolen daughter, threatening to go to the police and expose them all, she was silenced. Forever. Zuri's tears fell onto the fragile paper, blurring the ink as she read the final, heartbreaking line. If you are my daughter, know this. I never ever stopped looking for you. They may have taken you from my arms, but my love has always and will always belong to you. She couldn't breathe. Her mind screamed in denial, insisting that it couldn't possibly be true, but her heart, in its deepest recesses, knew that it was. Everything finally fit. Her father's inexplicable rage, the secret files, the cryptic letters, the DNA test. She wasn't Zuri Adawale, the privileged daughter of a wealthy tycoon. She was the child of a poor, loving maid, a child who had been stolen at birth to replace a dead baby. For the first time in her life, she didn't just feel betrayed, she felt stolen. Zuri couldn't stay still after reading Sada's letter. Every word felt like a piece of her own heart being violently torn apart. She needed to know more. She needed to see the faces of the people who truly belonged to her, the family that had been denied her. The letter had mentioned a small, remote village in Kaduna where Sada's family had once lived. Without telling anyone, not even Tabi, Zuri packed a small bag, bought a bus ticket with the last of her money, and began the long journey north. The road was dusty and endless, and her thoughts never stopped racing. For the first time in her life, she had no idea who she really was, but she was fiercely determined to find out. When she finally arrived in the quiet, sun-baked village, people watched her with open curiosity. She was dressed too neatly. She spoke too clearly. She was obviously from the city. But there was something familiar in her eyes, in the shape of her face, that made them stare just a little longer than was polite. She began to ask around, gently, cautiously, mentioning the name Sada. Most people went silent, their faces closing off. Finally, an old man with kind eyes pointed her towards a small, weathered house at the very edge of the village. He said, "Go there. You'll find someone who remembers." Zuri walked up the dusty path to the little clay house and knocked on the worn wooden door. An old woman opened it, her hands trembling slightly with age. The moment she saw Zuri's face, her eyes widened in disbelief. Tears instantly welled up, spilling down her wrinkled cheeks. "Oh my God," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You have her eyes." Zuri froze, her eyes filling with tears. You knew Sada?" she asked, her voice shaking. The woman nodded slowly, her gaze tracing every line of Zuri's face, as if she were seeing a ghost. "I am her sister," she said, her voice weak. "You look just like her. Every line of your face, every glance, it's her." Zuri felt her knees go weak, and she nearly collapsed as the tears she had been holding back finally blurred her vision. "Please," she begged, "tell me about her." The old woman led her inside the small, clean home and began to speak. She told Zuri that her mother, Sada, had been kind and fiercely loving, a hard-working woman with a spirit that could not be broken. She had never for a moment accepted the story that her baby had died. For years, she searched everywhere, even returning to the gates of the Adawale estate, begging for answers, for just a glimpse of her child. The villagers had warned her to stop, telling her that very powerful, dangerous people were involved, but she refused to give up. Then one day, she simply didn't come home. Her body was later found near the Adawale gates. The official report said it was an accident, but everyone in the village knew what had really happened. They knew that she had been silenced, but no one ever dared to speak the truth aloud. Zuri broke down completely then, her body racked with deep, gut-wrenching sobs. She had spent her entire life surrounded by unimaginable comfort and wealth, never once realizing it was all built on the pain and murder of someone else, her own mother. The old woman held her tightly, stroking her hair. "Your mother never stopped loving you. Even when they took you, her heart never, ever let you go." At that moment, Zuri understood. She had been stolen, yes, but she still carried her real mother's unbreakable heart within her. Zuri returned to Abuja with a fire burning in her heart. The devastating truth she had learned in Kaduna gave her a strength she never knew she possessed. The image of her aunt's tear-streaked face, the tragic story of Sada's life and death, it all filled her with a quiet, unshakable fury. She was no longer the broken, shamed girl who had stumbled out of that mansion. She was the daughter of a woman who had been murdered for the truth, and she was ready to speak for both of them. The city lights at Abuja looked different now as she made her way towards the Adawale mansion. She wasn't coming back to beg for forgiveness or to cry. She was coming for justice. When she arrived at the grand iron gates, the guards moved to stop her, but she held up the thick folder from the lawyer's office. She said, "Tell him his real daughter has come home." Her father, the man who had raised her, sat in his opulent study, looking utterly startled when she was shown in. His face turned ashen as Zuri strode to his desk and placed the documents down one by one. The DNA results.
"You stole my life," she said, her voice quiet but ringing with power. "You took me from my mother, you had her killed, and you built your entire empire on her pain." He shot up from his chair, his face a mask of false composure. "You don't understand what you're talking about," he began, but she cut him off with a sharp gesture. "No, you don't understand. You buried the truth because it didn't fit your perfect public image, and now everyone is going to know." At that exact moment, Nola swept into the room. When she saw the damning documents spread across the desk, raw panic flashed across her face. She lunged forward and grabbed the papers, trying to tear them to shreds. "These are lies!" she shrieked, her voice shrill and ugly. "You're nothing but a mistake!" But before she could destroy the evidence, a new, calm voice spoke from the doorway. It was Adira, a young, brilliant lawyer who had once worked quietly in her father's firm. "Actually," Adira said firmly, stepping into the room, "those are official records, and certified copies have already been submitted to the court." She looked directly at Zuri and gave a small, encouraging nod. "You did the right thing." Zuri felt tears of overwhelming relief fill her eyes as she realized that, for the first time, someone was finally standing beside her. Within days, the dam broke. Formal investigations began. The Adewale family's name was plastered across every newspaper and television screen. Headlines screamed, "Heiress cut from $31 million will turns out to be the real victim." The once mighty Adewale empire began to crumble under the weight of the truth. Forged documents, secret payments, and the shocking story of a kidnapping and murder that had been buried for 25 years all came to light. Zuri didn't celebrate. She simply stood in front of the mansion one last time, watching the gates close. She had lost the only family she had ever known, but she had finally gained her truth. And that was worth everything. Weeks passed after the explosive court hearing. The Adewale mansion, once an untouchable fortress of wealth and power, now stood surrounded by police cars and swarms of reporters. The powerful family that had once looked down on the entire world was now trembling on the verge of collapse. The court had ordered all of their assets frozen pending the full investigation. No one could touch a single dollar. The empire that had seemed so unbreakable was falling apart, piece by agonizing piece. While Zuri stayed out of the spotlight, quietly trying to process the whirlwind of events,
she received another call from Kaduna. It was Sada's sister, the woman who had welcomed her with tears and truth. Her voice shook with a new emotion as she said, "Zuri, my dear, there's something else you need to see." Zuri traveled back to the village, her heart full of apprehension, not knowing what to expect. When she arrived, her aunt handed her another folded yellowed envelope. It contained a last will and testament written by Sada herself just before she died. Tucked inside it was a land document, worn and faded with age, but still legally binding. It showed that a large, valuable piece of land in Abuja, the very same plot where one of the grand Adewale estates now stood, had originally belonged to Sada's family. The Adewales had bought it years ago, using forged papers and intimidation shortly after Sada's death. Zuri's hands trembled as she read the legal descriptions on the document. Her mother had owned this land. The Adewale family had built their glittering wealth on stolen soil. "So the mansion," she whispered in disbelief, "is on my mother's land?" Her aunt nodded, fresh tears glistening in her old, wise eyes. "Yes, my dear, that land and everything on it is yours, by blood and by law." When Zuri's lawyer, Adira, presented the authentic land deed to the court, the judges were stunned. After a thorough review, they confirmed the shocking truth. The Adewale mansion and the valuable land beneath it legally belonged to the descendants of Sada. And since Zuri was her only child, everything was now hers. The news spread like wildfire. Headlines flooded social media. "Stolen daughter Zuri declared legal owner of multi-million-dollar estate." Cameras flashed everywhere she went. The same society people who had once whispered about her in scorn were now whispering her name in awe. When the official papers were finally handed to her, Zuri stood outside the mansion gates once again. This time, she wasn't there as a rejected daughter or an accused thief. She was there as the rightful heir. The guards, the same men who had thrown her out, bowed their heads slightly, waiting for her command. She looked at the massive house that had once made her feel so small and unloved, and a soft, sad smile touched her lips. "This isn't about revenge," she said quietly to herself. "It's about justice. And it's about my mother finally getting her peace." Months later, Zuri returned to the mansion gates one last time. This was the very same spot where her heart had once shattered, where she had been branded a thief and cast out with nothing. But this time, the air itself felt different. The grand house that loomed behind the gates, a monument to greed and lies, now legally belonged to her. Everyone expected her to move in, to claim the lavish luxury that had been stolen from her at birth. But Zuri didn't. She knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that walls built on such profound pain didn't need to be lived in. They needed to be transformed. Instead of turning the estate into her private home, she made it into something far more powerful, far more meaningful. She officially renamed it Sada's Haven, a sanctuary and safe house for children who had been rescued from trafficking and abuse. Every opulent corner was given a new purpose. Every gilded room told a new story, a story of hope. When a prominent journalist visited for an interview, the cameras flashing, they asked the one question everyone wanted to know. "Do you hate your father for what he did?" Zuri paused, her expression thoughtful. A faint, serene smile appeared on her face as she replied, "I don't hate the man who raised me, but I mourn the fact that he never even tried to know the person I really was." Her voice was calm and steady, but every word carried a profound weight, the kind of strength that is forged only in the crucible of immense pain. After the interview, as she prepared to leave, the same family lawyer, Mr. Kudo, who had once handed her the letter that destroyed her world, approached her again. He held out a crisp, white envelope, his expression softer, filled with a quiet respect. "It's official. he said gently. "Your real name has been legally restored." Zuri opened it and saw the new document. Her full name was printed in clear, bold letters. Zuri Sada, the name her real mother had given her, the name she was never allowed to have. She looked up at the vast, open sky, tears of pure, cleansing release filling her eyes, but a beautiful smile rested on her lips. "Mama, they stole me from you, but I finally found my way home." A gentle wind brushed against her face, feeling like a soft caress. And in that perfect, peaceful moment, she felt a profound sense of peace, not just for herself, but for the mother whose incredible love had finally reached her, even from beyond the grave. Zuri turned away from the mansion and walked towards the children playing joyfully in the garden. Her story, which had begun with such devastating loss, had become a story of rebirth. She was no longer just the stolen daughter. She was the woman who had reclaimed her truth, honored her mother's memory, and dedicated her life to giving hope to others who had none.